The flames reached toward the star-filled sky like desperate fingers clawing at heaven itself, casting dancing shadows across the weathered face of Samuel Iron Sam Crawford as he watched his life's work turn to ash and ember. The barn had stood for 23 years, built with his own calloused hands when he first claimed this stretch of Texas prairie as his own. Now it crackled and roared in defiance against the cool night air, consuming everything he had worked so hard to build. Sam's weathered hands clenched into fists as he spotted the figure silhouetted against the orange glow. A man sitting casually on horseback as if watching a 4th of July celebration, rather than an act of deliberate destruction. The stranger wore a black duster that flapped in the wind, created by the fire's fury, and even from a distance, Sam could see the man's teeth gleaming in what appeared to be a satisfied smile. "You son of a bitch!" Sam roared, his voice carrying across the open ground between them. "That barn housed my prize bulls, my winter feed, everything I needed to keep this ranch running." The mysterious rider tipped his hat in mock courtesy, revealing a face that seemed carved from granite and cruelty. "Evening, Crawford. Mighty fine blaze, wouldn't you say? Really lights up the whole valley." Sam reached for the Winchester rifle propped against his porch railing, but the stranger's hand moved with lightning speed to the pearl-handled Colt at his hip. The message was clear. Any sudden movements would result in more than just property damage. "Name's Jake Morrison," the arsonist called out, his voice carrying an odd tone of familiarity that made Sam's blood run cold. "Reckon you and I need to have ourselves a conversation about old debts and new reckonings." The name hit Sam like a physical blow, dragging up memories he had buried deep in the furthest corners of his mind. Morrison. It had been 15 years since he had heard that name spoken aloud. 15 years since the incident that had changed the course of his life forever. Sam's face went pale beneath his tan, and his grip on the rifle loosened as the weight of the past came crashing back. "That's right. Crawford," Morrison continued, clearly enjoying the recognition dawning on the rancher's face. "You remember now, don't you? Remember what you took from me all those years ago in Tombstone?" Sam's mind raced back to that dusty Arizona town where he had been a different man entirely. Young, hot-headed, and quick with both his fists and his gun, he had worn a deputy's badge and believed in justice with the fervor of youth. The Morrison gang had been terrorizing the territory for months, robbing banks and killing anyone who stood in their way. When they had finally cornered Jake's younger brother Billy in that saloon, Sam had been the one to pull the trigger. "Billy drew first," Sam said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The whole town saw it. He was reaching for his gun, and I had no choice." Morrison's laugh was cold as winter wind across the prairie. "Choice? You had plenty of choices, Crawford. You could have wounded him, could have tried to take him alive. Instead, you put 3 bullets in my baby brother's chest and watched him die on that saloon floor." The fire continued to rage behind Morrison, creating an almost hellish backdrop for this confrontation between past and present. Sam could see his cattle in the distance, spooked by the flames and the acrid smoke that filled the air. His prize, Hereford bulls, worth more money than most men saw in a lifetime, were probably halfway to the next county by now. "I did my job," Sam replied, trying to inject some authority back into his voice. "Billy was a killer and a thief. The law was the law." "The law," Morrison spat. "You hid behind that badge like a coward, thinking it gave you the right to play God with people's lives. Well, where's your badge now, Crawford? Where's your authority in this godforsaken corner of nowhere?" Sam had left law enforcement the day after Billy Morrison's funeral, unable to bear the weight of taking a life even in the line of duty. He'd come to Texas to start fresh, to build something with his hands instead of destroying with his gun. The ranch had been his redemption, his chance to create life instead of ending it. "What do you want, Morrison?" Sam asked, resignation creeping into his voice. "You've burned my barn, scattered my herd. Isn't that enough revenge for you?" Morrison dismounted slowly, keeping his hand near his weapon as he approached the porch. In the firelight, Sam could see the family resemblance to Billy, the same angular jaw and piercing green eyes that had haunted his nightmares for years. "This is just the beginning, Crawford. I've spent 15 years tracking you down, 15 years planning what I was going to do when I finally found you. A barn and some cattle don't even begin to balance the scales for what you took from me." The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted their confrontation, and both men turned to see a rider approaching from the direction of town. As the figure drew closer, Sam recognized the slight frame and determined posture of Martha Whitfield, the town's most respected widow and owner of the general store. Martha Whitfield had arrived in Dusty Creek 3 years earlier, shortly after her husband's death from consumption. She had quickly established herself as a pillar of the community, known for her generosity to struggling families and her fierce protection of the town's children. What most people didn't know was that Martha had her own secrets, her own reasons for choosing this remote corner of Texas to start over. "Sam," Martha called out as she rode up to the scene, "we saw the fire from town. Are you hurt?" Morrison's attention shifted to the newcomer, and something flickered across his face that Sam couldn't quite identify. Recognition. Surprise? Fear? The outlaw's hand moved away from his gun for the first time since the confrontation began. "Mrs. Whitfield," Sam replied, never taking his eyes off Morrison. "I'm fine, but as you can see, I've lost the barn and probably half my herd." Martha dismounted gracefully despite her long skirts, her eyes taking in the scene with the sharp intelligence that had made her such a successful businesswoman. She looked from Sam to Morrison, and Sam could see her mind working, cataloguing details and drawing conclusions. "This was no accident," she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "This fire was deliberately set." Morrison tipped his hat to Martha with exaggerated courtesy. "Evening, ma'am. Jake Morrison's the name, and you're quite right about the fire, though I prefer to think of it as a long-overdue reckoning." At the mention of Morrison's name, Martha went completely still. The color drained from her face, and her hand moved instinctively to her throat, as if she were having trouble breathing. Sam noticed the reaction and wondered what connection the widow might have to this man from his past. "Morrison," Martha whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackling flames. "Jake Morrison." The outlaw's eyes narrowed as he studied Martha's face more closely. "Do we know each other, ma'am?" "Because you look mighty familiar." Martha straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin with the dignity that had made her so respected in Dusty Creek. "We've never met, Mr. Morrison, but I knew your brother Billy." The admission hung in the air like smoke from the burning barn, heavy with implications that Sam couldn't begin to understand. How could Martha have known Billy Morrison? And why did her revelation seem to affect Jake so profoundly? "Billy's been dead 15 years, Morrison said slowly, his voice losing some of its earlier confidence. "How exactly did you know my brother, Mrs. Whitfield?" Martha looked directly at Sam, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. "Because Sam Crawford, Billy Morrison was my first husband." The words hit both men like bullets from an unseen sniper, stopping their confrontation dead in its tracks. Sam felt his world tilt on its axis as he tried to process what Martha had just revealed. Billy Morrison, the young outlaw he had killed in that Tombstone saloon 15 years ago, had been married to the woman who had become the moral center of Dusty Creek. Jake Morrison's hand fell completely away from his gun as he stared at Martha in shock. "That's impossible," he stammered. "Billy never mentioned being married to anyone. He would have told me." Martha's laugh was bitter as prairie wind. "Your brother told you many things, Mr. Morrison, but the truth wasn't often among them. We were married for 6 months before he decided that robbing banks was more appealing than settling down with a wife." The flames from the burning barn continued to illuminate their faces, casting dramatic shadows that seemed to emphasize the weight of this revelation. Sam found himself studying Martha's features as if seeing her for the first time, searching for any resemblance to the young man he had killed all those years ago. "Billy left me in a boarding house in El Paso," Martha continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. Told me he was going to make one big score, and then we'd buy a ranch somewhere, raise a family. Instead, he rode off with your gang and started a killing spree that stretched from Arizona to Colorado. Sam's mind reeled with the implications. For 3 years, he had known Martha as a pillar of respectability, a woman who epitomized everything good and decent about frontier life. The idea that she had once been married to Billy Morrison, one of the most notorious outlaws in the territory, seemed impossible to reconcile with the woman who organized church socials and cared for orphaned children. "You're lying," Jake snarled, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "Billy would have told me if he had a wife. We shared everything, every plan, every secret." Martha reached into her small leather purse and withdrew a tarnished silver locket. She opened it with practiced movements, revealing a small photograph that she held up for both men to see. Even in the flickering firelight, Sam could make out the face of a young Billy Morrison, his arm around a much younger Martha who was smiling with the naive happiness of new love. "We were married in a little church in San Antonio," Martha said quietly. "I was 17 years old and completely in love with a man I thought was a cattle buyer named William Morrison. I didn't learn his real occupation until after our wedding night, when I found wanted posters with his face on them in his saddlebags." Jake stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the locket as if it contained the secrets of the universe. "That's Billy's face, all right," he admitted grudgingly, "but that don't prove nothing. Could be any woman who got her picture taken with him." Martha snapped the locket shut and returned it to her purse. "Your brother had a scar on his left shoulder from when he fell out of a tree as a boy. He used to tell me it looked like a crescent moon. He also had a birthmark on his right hip that resembled a star, and he was missing the tip of his little finger on his left hand from an accident with an axe when he was 12. The specific details hit Jake like physical blows. These were intimate details that only someone very close to Billy could have known. Details that proved beyond doubt that Martha was telling the truth about her marriage to his brother. "So you were Billy's wife," Jake said slowly, his entire demeanor changing as the reality sank in. "That makes you family. That makes you my responsibility." Sam watched this exchange with growing concern. He could see the wheels turning in Jake's mind, could sense the outlaw formulating a new plan based on this unexpected revelation. Whatever Jake had originally intended for the evening, Martha's presence was clearly changing the dynamic in ways that Sam couldn't predict. "I stopped being Billy's wife the day he chose outlawry over our marriage," Martha replied firmly. "And I certainly never asked for your protection or consideration. Mr. Morrison." The burning barn chose that moment to partially collapse, sending a shower of sparks high into the night sky and temporarily illuminating the entire scene with brilliant orange light. Sam used the distraction to edge closer to his rifle, but Jake noticed the movement immediately. "Don't even think about it, Crawford," Jake warned, his hand returning to his gun. "This conversation just got a whole lot more complicated. And I need time to think." Martha stepped between the two men, her small frame somehow commanding attention despite being dwarfed by both of the armed men facing off around her. "There's been enough killing, Mr. Morrison. Your brother's death was a tragedy, but it was also 15 years ago. How much more blood needs to be spilled before you consider the debt paid?" "You don't understand," Jake replied, his voice taking on a desperate edge. "Billy was all I had left in this world. Our parents died when we were kids, and it was just him and me against everyone else. When Crawford killed him, he didn't just take my brother's life, he took my future." Sam found his voice again, though it sounded strange to his own ears. "I never wanted to kill Billy, Martha, Jake. The situation got out of hand. And by the time I realized what was happening, it was too late to do anything except defend myself and the other people in that saloon." "Defend yourself?" Jake's voice rose with renewed anger. "Billy was drunk and heartbroken because his wife had left him. He told me about losing you, Martha, about how you couldn't handle being married to an outlaw. He was drawing his gun to end his own misery, not to shoot anyone else." The revelation hit Sam like a thunderbolt. In all his years of reliving that confrontation, he had never considered that Billy might have been attempting suicide rather than murder. The young outlaw's actions, which had seemed so threatening at the time, took on an entirely different meaning in this new context. Martha's face crumpled with grief and guilt. "Oh, Billy," she whispered, "I should have stayed. I should have tried harder to make him choose a different path." "It wouldn't have mattered," Jake said, his voice gentler now as he addressed his dead brother's widow. Billy was too far gone by then. The outlaw life had gotten into his blood like poison, but Crawford didn't know that when he pulled the trigger. Did you, Crawford? Sam felt the weight of 15 years of guilt pressing down on him like a physical burden. "No, I didn't know. All I saw was a known killer reaching for his gun in a crowded saloon. I reacted the way I was trained to react." The three of them stood in silence for several moments, each lost in their own thoughts about the past and its implications for the present. The fire from the barn was beginning to die down, but the emotional flames between them seemed to burn hotter than ever. "So what happens now?" Sam asked finally. "You've had your revenge, Jake. My barn is gone, my cattle scattered. Is that enough, or do you still plan to kill me?" Jake looked from Sam to Martha and back again, clearly struggling with conflicting emotions and loyalties. "I don't know," he admitted. "Finding out about Martha changes things. Billy's widow deserves to have a say in how this plays out." Martha looked at both men with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of years beyond her age. "What I want is for the killing to stop. Billy's death was a tragedy, but it was also the consequence of choices he made. Adding more death to the pile won't bring him back or heal the wounds that his loss created." "But justice," Jake protested. "Someone has to pay for what was taken from us." "Justice and revenge aren't the same thing, Mr. Morrison," Martha replied. "If you want to honor your brother's memory, find a better way than adding more graves to the cemetery." Sam watched this exchange with growing hope. Perhaps Martha's intervention could prevent this confrontation from ending in more bloodshed. But he also sensed that Jake Morrison was not a man easily swayed from his chosen path, even by the widow of his beloved brother. The sound of more approaching horses interrupted their discussion, and Sam looked up to see what appeared to be half the town of Dusty Creek riding toward his ranch. Word of the fire had clearly spread, and the citizens had come to offer their assistance to one of their own. "Looks like we're about to have company," Sam observed. "Jake, you might want to consider your next move carefully. These are good people, and they won't take kindly to threats against one of their neighbors." Jake's eyes narrowed as he counted the approaching riders. "This isn't over, Crawford. Martha or no Martha, you and I still have unfinished business. The town is coming and tensions are at the breaking point. What will Martha reveal that silences everyone? Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon to see how this explosive confrontation unfolds. Don't miss the shocking conclusion. The approaching riders from Dusty Creek created a thunderous drumbeat against the hard-packed earth, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies in the darkness as they drew closer to the burning remains of Sam's barn. Leading the group was Sheriff Tom Bradley, a man whose reputation for fairness had earned him respect throughout the county, followed closely by Doc Harrison, Mayor Jennings, and at least a dozen other concerned citizens who had seen the glow of the fire from town. Jake Morrison's hand moved instinctively toward his gun as he calculated the odds of facing down an entire town's worth of armed men. But Martha stepped closer to him, her presence somehow calming his aggressive instincts, even as the situation grew more dangerous by the moment. "Mr. Morrison," Martha said quietly, "these people are here to help, not to cause trouble. But if you draw that gun, you'll force them into a fight none of us want." Sam watched Jake's internal struggle with growing tension. The outlaw was clearly outgunned and outnumbered, but desperate men were capable of incredibly destructive final acts. One wrong move, one misunderstood gesture, and the peaceful community of Dusty Creek could become a battlefield. Sheriff Bradley was the first to reach them, his experienced eyes quickly taking in the scene. The burned barn, the three figures standing in tense confrontation, and the unmistakable signs of deliberate arson. His hand rested casually on his holstered weapon, ready for trouble, but not actively seeking it. "Sam, you all right?" Bradley called out as he dismounted. "We saw the fire from town and figured you might need help." "I'm fine, Tom," Sam replied, his voice carefully controlled. "But as you can see, someone decided to burn down my barn tonight." The sheriff's attention shifted to Jake Morrison, noting the man's distinctive black duster and the professional way he wore his gun belt. "And you would be?" Jake straightened to his full height, meeting the sheriff's gaze with defiant pride. "Jake Morrison. And before you ask, yes, I'm the one who set the fire." A murmur rippled through the assembled townspeople at this bold admission. Several hands moved toward weapons, but Sheriff Bradley raised his hand for calm. "That's a serious crime, Morrison. Mind telling me why you decided to burn down Sam's barn?" "Old business," Jake replied tersely. "Crawford and I have a score to settle that goes back 15 years. Martha stepped forward before the situation could escalate further. "Sheriff Bradley, there's something you and the others need to understand about this situation. Something about Mr. Morrison's connection to our town." The sheriff's eyebrows rose with interest. "What kind of connection would that be, Mrs. Whitfield?" Martha took a deep breath, clearly steeling herself for what she was about to reveal. "Jake Morrison is the brother of my first husband, Billy Morrison." The name hit the assembled crowd like a lightning strike. Several people gasped audibly, and Sam could see recognition dawning on face after face. The Morrison gang's exploits had been legendary throughout Texas and the surrounding territories, their names spoken in whispers, and their crimes the stuff of cautionary tales told around campfires. "Billy Morrison," Doc Harrison repeated slowly. "The outlaw who was killed in Tombstone 15 years ago?" "The same," Martha confirmed. "Billy was my husband for 6 months before he chose the outlaw life over marriage. I was Martha Morrison then, though I've gone by my maiden name of Whitfield since coming to Dusty Creek." Mayor Jennings pushed forward, his face flushed with anger and concern. "Martha, why didn't you tell us about this connection when you first came to town? We had a right to know about your past associations." Martha's chin lifted with quiet dignity. "My past associations, as you call them, consisted of being an abandoned wife who was left penniless and alone when her husband chose crime over responsibility. I came to Dusty Creek to start over, to build a life based on honest work and community service. I believe my actions over the past 3 years speak louder than a name I carried for 6 months 15 years ago." Sheriff Bradley nodded thoughtfully. "That they do, Martha. You've been nothing but an asset to this community, but this does complicate matters considerably." Jake had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement. "You people actually respect her, even knowing she was married to one of the most wanted outlaws in the territory." "We respect her because of who she is now, not because of who she was married to briefly in the past," replied Sarah Montgomery, the school teacher. "Martha has helped every family in this town at one time or another. She's fed the hungry, nursed the sick, and taught our children to read and write. She organized the church social that raised money for the Henderson family when their crop failed," added James Peterson, the blacksmith. "And she personally paid for medical supplies when the fever hit last winter." One by one, the townspeople began sharing stories of Martha's generosity and kindness, creating a chorus of testimonials that seemed to surprise Jake Morrison more with each new revelation. This was clearly not the reception he had expected when Martha's true identity was revealed. "But she was married to Billy Morrison," Jake insisted, as if repetition could somehow change the town's reaction to this news. "And you're Billy Morrison's brother," Martha replied gently. "Does that automatically make you guilty of every crime he committed?" The question seemed to hit Jake with unexpected force. For his entire adult life, he had defined himself primarily through his relationship to his younger brother, allowing Billy's memory and his own need for revenge to drive his every decision. The idea that he might be judged as an individual rather than simply as Billy Morrison's brother was apparently a novel concept. Sheriff Bradley stepped into the momentary silence. "Mr. Morrison, you've admitted to arson, which is a serious felony. Under normal circumstances, I'd be obligated to arrest you and transport you to the county seat for trial. These aren't normal circumstances. Tom, Sam said suddenly, surprising everyone, including himself. Martha's right about the killing needing to stop somewhere. I've carried the guilt of Billy's death for 15 years, and Jake's carried the anger. Maybe it's time we both found a different way to handle this. Jake stared at Sam in amazement. You're not going to press charges? After I burned down your barn and scattered your cattle? Sam looked around at the faces of his neighbors, people who had come out in the middle of the night to offer their help to a fellow community member. These people represent everything good about frontier life, Jake. They judge folks by their actions, not their past mistakes. Martha's proven that a person can overcome their history and build something better. What are you suggesting, Sam? Sheriff Bradley asked. I'm suggesting that Jake help me rebuild what he destroyed, Sam replied. Work off the debt with honest labor instead of paying it with blood. Lord knows I could use the help around here, especially with my herd scattered to hell and gone. Martha's face lit up with hope and approval. Sam, that's a wonderful idea. Jake, this could be your chance to start over, just like I did. Jake looked around at the assembled townspeople, seeing something in their faces that he hadn't expected. Not condemnation or fear, but cautious acceptance of the possibility that he could change. You people are all crazy, he said finally, but there was no anger in his voice now, only bewilderment. Maybe we are, laughed Doc Harrison. But it's a good kind of crazy, the kind that believes people can be better than their worst moments, the kind that gives second chances to orphan boys and widows with complicated pasts, added Sheriff Bradley with a meaningful look at both Martha and Sam Jake. Morrison stood in silence for several long moments. The weight of 15 years of anger and revenge, warring with the unexpected possibility of redemption. Finally, he reached up and slowly unbuckled his gun belt, letting it fall to the ground at his feet. All right, he said quietly. All right. I'll help you rebuild your barn, Crawford. But I want it understood that this doesn't mean I forgive you for killing Billy. And I want it understood that I'll never stop regretting the necessity of that shooting, Sam replied. But maybe we can both learn to live with what happened instead of dying because of it. Martha stepped between the two men and placed a hand on each of their shoulders. Billy would want his death to mean something positive, not just more violence and destruction. This is how we honor his memory, by choosing to build instead of tear down. As the first light of dawn began to creep across the Texas sky, the people of Dusty Creek began making plans for the barn raising that would take place as soon as the debris could be cleared. Jake Morrison, former outlaw and brother to one of the territory's most notorious criminals, found himself being welcomed into a community that judged him not by his past, but by his willingness to choose a different future. The name that had once struck fear into the hearts of honest citizens throughout the West was now spoken with cautious hope in a small Texas town where second chances were considered as valuable as gold and twice as precious as revenge. What an incredible transformation. From revenge to redemption, this story shows the power of community and second chances. Smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to never miss our amazing Western tales. Share this story with everyone who believes in the power of forgiveness and starting over. What did you think of Martha's brave revelation? Let us know in the comments below.